Hello Internet, today we're going to be looking at some Python. Specifically I thought we'd look at Argparse. It's a library module for Python that kind of makes it really easy to write tools that you can just use whenever you're working with something. So prior to finding this, I was doing a lot of like bash scripts and stuff, and I don't really like bash, so found this. And so what this allows you to do is effectively specify arguments to a Python script. So normally you'd run your script and you'd be either Python, or you just make your file executable and run that. But you do like python tool.py, and then you'd give it a number of arguments that you'd want to do something with. The problem with that is you would have to like define a usage and all this other fun stuff, and then you'd have to handle parsing, and it just got kind of messy, and then validating all of that. It turned your script from I want to write this into a file into something much bigger than that, just because you wanted people to use it right. So this makes it really easy to sort of document and enable your code to kind of handle those arguments in a really easy way. And because of that, it makes writing tools in Python very, very easy. So I figured we kind of cover that and hopefully kind of get into some Python-y stuff. This has been something I've been kind of learning over the past few months as well. So my Python knowledge is not the same as my Java or C# knowledge, but it's getting better. So if I screw anything up, let me know in the comments and I'll fix it in the next video. But generally what we want to do for this is I want to be able to specify a file and then some text to write to it, if that makes any sense. So the general idea is I want to be able to say test.text, and I want to write hello world. So that's just like a basic example of what I want to be able to run. This will still work right now because those arguments are just going to be ignored. So if I run this right now, we just get hello internet because that's all this script has in it. But I want to be able to parse those arguments. So here is the documentation for, ooh, that is huge. Here's the documentation for Argparse. I was kind of walking through this previously. Here's their like super basic example. The general idea is you're going to import Argparse. So let's just do that right off the bat. Let me close this other thing because that's really not needed. And so effectively we're going to import this. And then after we have this imported, we're going to define a set of arguments that we expect for our program, and then at the end we'll parse the arguments, and that's going to actually take the argv, the argument values that are passed into our program, and actually do something with those. One of the cool things is this also gives you a, if we were to do say python tool.py -- help, which is sort of the traditional I need help in bash, it would give you a help file instead of hello internet. So it wouldn't run your program, it would actually exit out and just give you a, here's the commands that are available, here's some of the arguments you can do, here's what it should look like. And you can define all of that. So that's sort of what we're going to be doing. The first bit here defines the parser. So we can actually just copy this in. But the way this is working is, I'm going to drop the hello internet. But we have a parser that we're creating. You don't need to define variables here. Just assigning it into a value will create the variable for you. We're taking argparse, which is our new imported module, creating an argument parser and saying the description is process some integers. That's not what we want to do. Write text into a file. And so this is going to now assign this program and effectively say this parser is going to write text into a file, and it's a script called python tool.py. That gets pulled out when you run this. And now there's a little bit extra we need. I'm going to skip these next two, which are actually adding the arguments. The important one is parse args, which actually executes all of this. So in between these two arguments, we're going to have, ooh, that's not how you do a comment, define arguments. And so we create a parser, and then after we've defined the entire parser, we're going to parse everything, and that's going to give us some arguments object. That arguments object is going to have all of the parsed stuff. So one of the cool things is you can say, I want this specific argument to go into this variable, and you can kind of do some transformations and stuff to make that kind of work. And so like flags and stuff get transformed into booleans instead of you having to do that manually. So what we should be able to do now is, now that we have this, I'm just going to re-put this hello internet back in. And so the general idea here is if I do this, I shouldn't see hello internet because this parse args is going to say, oh, he wants help. Let's give that to him. And so that's exactly what happens. When I run this, it's going to say the usage of this is python tool.py with an optional -h. So the brackets mean optional. And it's going to write text into a file with optional arguments of -h or --help. Either one works. So just to prove that, -h does the exact same thing. And then that's pretty much it. So just by adding these 3 arguments, we sort of got this nice little help thing, which sort of makes documentation a lot easier because you give this script to somebody now, they can figure out how to use it. Even if it's just like running something, you normally don't necessarily want to just run random scripts that somebody gave you. So being able to actually get the documentation is kind of nice. Granted, if you don't trust the script, I don't know why you'd trust this, but it's there. So this way, at least you know what's intended to happen. Cool thing, it just exits for us, so we don't have to worry about like stopping if anything's invalid. If the arguments aren't valid, like there's a required parameter that we don't give it, it's not going to work. So let's do that next. There's these arguments here. This, their example is given a set of integers and whether to sum or max the 2 integers. So what their example will do is it's either going to find the maximum integer or calculate a sum of integers. And you can give a variable number of integers. So just to kind of give an example of what that looks like, we can just use their example. So if I run help again, we now have a optional sum. So that it was going to list the default here, but that's just because we typed this here. The default isn't listed anywhere else. So that's something to note. And this is getting even longer, but you can see our usage has changed a little bit. Our h is still there, but now we have this -- sum, and then we have n, and then n ... which means we expect at least 1, but any additional number of them. So I'm expecting at least 1 version of n, 1 integer, but I could get as many integers as you want to give me. So I could give it just 1, or I could give it 6 or 6,000 or whatever. 6,000 might be excessive. The way this is working, there is a label here. And so integers is actually the set of integers. We didn't copy the final bit here, which is from the arguments. That integers is not a label. Well, it is a label. But what it's doing is actually taking that arguments that gets generated. It's saying, I want you to put that in here, into this integers thing. And so the cool thing with that is we're just kind of dropping this in there and we can just access it. So what I can do, that's the wrong thing. We're in Visual Studio Code. Is I can actually go through and print all this. If I can remember how to do a for loop. Or not. For each. Okay, there we go. Sorry, my Python kind of comes and goes still, especially some of these like loops and stuff. I'm still figuring all that stuff out, so anyway, for target list and expression list, that's not what we want. We want to grab args.integers, So we're just going to grab all the integers from this arguments list, and here is our integer. Sure. And then the idea is we just want to print the integer. So now instead of doing this, I should be able to give it a set of integers like 1, 2, 3, 4, and it will print 1, 2, 3, 4 because we just looped through all those integers in this list and printed them out, which is pretty handy. And so we can actually change what we're doing here. One of the cool things, the type is actually specified, which means it's going to be validated. So if I switch this into that, we're going to get an error here, and it's relatively handy. Argument n invalid int value of sadfasdv. And so it gives you the usage here, and then says what the error is, which means I didn't write any of that. This is giving it to me for free, which is great because I don't have to write it. I can switch that up actually. Oops, let's go back to the plus. I can make this say a string. Save this, and then if I run this again, now it works because I'm expecting strings now instead of ints. So fun things you can do with that. It kind of gives you all of this extra handy little stuff for free. The metavar is just the actual name here, so n is where we're getting that. And then the n args is actually how many arguments are expected. So this is, I believe, regex style. I could be wrong there. So plus is going to be 1 or more. Star is going to be 0 or more. So I could, as an example, I could run it like this and it will still work. But if I go back to the plus now, so that was with star. If I go back to the plus, we're going to get an error that there's too few arguments because it's expecting at least one n, whereas the star, if I were to do a -h, the n is actually inside of this bracket. So the n becomes optional entirely. So there's sort of all of that fun stuff. The other one gets a little bit more complicated. I think this example exists because it kind of covers two of the main uses. This is a flag. So the way this works is you can either specify a sum or it will use the default value. So we're storing this in our accumulate. And the way this is working is there's actually two functions here, sum and max. Those are actually functions that are going to either sum or max an iterable set of integers. And so we're storing a function into this accumulate value and then doing something with it. So if I don't pass anything in, the idea is it's going to find the max. So just to show what's going on here, args.accumulate of args.integers. So if I were to run this, I would expect it to print out 4 there. So we should get 4 twice. When I do 1, 2, 3, 4. And we do. We get 1, 2, 3, 4, and then another 4, and then hello internet because that's still there. And so that's doing that. But then if I were to specify --sum, now we get 10 because we summed 1, 2, 3, and 4, which hopefully is 10. And so that's sort of how that's working. We're storing one of these two functions into the accumulate value and then use it calling that. And then the default is the default. And then the constant is what actually gets used when this flag exists. So there's an action that is specified. The action is going to store a constant value into the destination when it's present. So if we provide a sum, it's going to invoke this action, which is going to do something with this. And so it's just taking this sum, putting it in here. I think that makes sense. And if it doesn't, let me know. But that's the general idea. So that kind of covers the basics, I guess, of how this whole thing is working. This isn't really what we want, though, because we want to actually write into a file. So we don't really need that. We don't need a flag or anything. So instead, I'm going to give this. We actually probably don't need most of this. So let's just give it a string. And the metavar, we don't need that. Let's just call this our file. Sure. The file to store the text in. Cool. Easy enough. And so if I -h this, you can see that it's expecting a file, and that's required. So if I don't provide that file, we get an error that file wasn't provided. And so if I do test.txt, we're going to run into a bunch of issues because our previous stuff doesn't exist anymore. So let's just delete all of that and do args.file. Cool. So we're just going to print out the file because we can. Let's do some string interpolation just to kind of write this out. So writing to %s. I thought it was, isn't %s? I don't think that's right. There we go. Another thing that I mix up the syntax for. There's two ways to format strings in Python. The %s is going to like format it as a string, or you can just do these blocks with the % after it, which is just going to say, for this string, take the stuff after it and put it into the string in order. So this args.file is going to fill this value there. And so it should say writing to files test.txt. Or not, because not all arguments converted during string format. That doesn't make any sense. That doesn't make any sense either. We're going to try that. Nope. Okay. Well, I can do a string.format. That's not how that works. This dot format on it, I guess. That'll work, but I don't really want to do that. Okay. I was going to do something cool, but apparently not. I should point this out. I'm using a Python 2.7. If you're using Python 3, things change. And if you're on a Mac, Python gets very weird. So that's another thing. Another thing I should kind of cover. We're using Argparse. Pip is the package manager. So if you're familiar with Java, it'd be similar to Maven. If you're familiar with C#, it'd be similar to NuGet. Pip works similarly. You just do this pip install Argparse, and that's it. I already have it, so it's going to say you're fine. And then prompt me to upgrade pip because it wants me to. But this is the important thing that says it's already satisfied. If it says that, then you're good. Macs are weird. I kind of mentioned that previously. Macs are weird because Macs ship with Python. And that causes all kinds of issues because the OS Python can conflict with your installed version of Python, which can be just odd. It does some weird things. There's a bunch of help on the internet to kind of fix that or kind of hack around that. I won't cover that here because I don't really know what I'd be doing. But that's an option if you start running into issues on a Mac. Just go and look something up because it's weird. So that's the best I can do there. Anyway, we have our file. Our file is there. That's great. So now that we have the file, we also need some text to write, which is great because we don't have to do anything else. Text. And so this is just going to be the text to write to the file. Great. And so I should be able to go back here, run this again, too few arguments. You can see our usage syntax changed again. Now we expect a file and some text. And so if I give it hello world, let's actually modify this. Writing to file print tab that sure dot format args dot text. So /t is going to be a tab character, so it's going to skip however many characters your terminal is set to skip, which hopefully just kind of makes this easier. The reason I'm printing this out is I just kind of want to validate that since I have quotes around hello world, it should see that as a single argument. If it doesn't, we'd have problems. But it does, and that lined up perfectly. Great. So we're writing to test.txt hello world, which is great. So now I need to actually write to the file, which means I need to access the OS. So import OS, which has a whole bunch of fun things in it, but os dot, uh-oh. Open? Yeah. Open file name args.file. So we're going to open a file. And this is the part that I am not super familiar with. We're going to get a file handle back, I believe. And I think there's something you have to do to make sure that this closes afterwards. So I may have to do some quick digging after we get this whole thing running, just to make sure I've kind of done it all right, because I might miss something. So os.write, and this is going to take our file descriptor, our file handle is what we were calling it, and write some text to it. So we're just going to write args.text, and then we're good. Notice Python is kind of weird. There's no semicolons. Semicolons don't exist. That's a syntax error. And it's all tab based. We didn't really get into that too much, except for our for loop. And you would have seen, like, if I do an if statement, if true would look something like this. And you'll notice it starts off on a tab. If I were to untab it, that is sort of the end of that. Is it? I'm pretty sure that's not good. That actually may be incorrect, because you can do. Nope, never mind. I'm incorrect. Totally thinking of the wrong thing. That's a different language. So effectively, if this is tabbed, it's part of this if block, and if I untab it, everything breaks. I should probably demonstrate that, because I've never actually tried that. So let's see what happens here. Hello. Another thing, single quotes and double quotes are the same thing. Some people will use them interchangeably for different things. So like interpolated strings will be single quotes or double quotes, and like constant strings will be of the other type. It's sort of up to you as far as I can tell. So expected and indented block. This is coming from my linter, Pylint. If you have Visual Studio Code, it's going to prompt you to install that automatically if you open up a Python file, and it will just figure out how to get it for you. Otherwise, you can just install that yourself. But if I tab this, it just works. And then if I were to go to the next line, we'd get that, and it would actually work. Kind of off topic, but that's all right. If statements are kind of important in programming. So theoretically, this will write to our file. No idea if that's actually going to work, but we're going to try it. So I should be able to run this and get an error. Because open expects an argument, we're going to give it a write flag. I'm pretty sure that's the one that it expects. To my knowledge, there's 3, but I could be wrong. There may be more. A, R, and W. A is append, R is read, and W is write. So write would overwrite the file, append would append to the file, and read would open it for reading only. And that's going to affect sort of how the file works. Appending and writing can be done differently. So an integer value is required. One sec, I'm going to go figure out how to do this because I had to go look it up anyway, so might as well just go and actually find out what I'm doing. I knew I was doing this wrong. os.open is different. We don't need that. We should just be able to do open. Open should work for us. I don't know how to write yet, but we should just be able to open it. One sec. f.read, f.write. Sure, we'll make this up as we go. So file handle should have a whole, yep, there we go, right. Awesome. And so now I can just do args.text and do that. So I should probably cover what the I just did because that didn't make any sense. So open is a command. I think it's new-ish, not new, but not old either. os.open does different stuff. It does, well, so if I import os, this OS thing has a bunch of OS stuff, which is going to interact directly with your operating system. It's going to do like system calls. I guess that's great if you want to do system stuff, but if you don't, these are easier, so you can just use these. That's my understanding. For your basic tools, this is all you need. So this actually does take that -w or the quote W, and then you just get a file handle back. I don't know if that's what it's called. You just get a file object back. I'll call it the file handle. It's just a file. So you get the file back, and then you can either read or write or do whatever. Depending on how you open the file, though, it's going to affect what you can do with the file. If you open it for reading, you probably aren't going to be able to write to it. And it will do other weird things. But this should work for us, which means there's two things I need to do. First, ls, which is just going to list everything in my directory. ls is actually not a PowerShell command. It's an alias in PowerShell to another thing, which is something that I don't remember. But it's not really relevant. It does the same thing as ls and bash would do. It just looks a little bit different because it's actually a Python alias. Anyway, if we go back here, I should be able to do this, and when I do ls again, we should see a test.txt with hello world in it. So, ls test.txt. And I should be able to open that. So if I do code test.txt, there it is. So here's our new file with hello world in it, which is great. It means everything's working. So now I have a tool that will write to a file this thing. This probably isn't the best example of a useful tool, but it's a basic tool that you might do something similar to, whether you're just like compiling a report or something. If you need to pull something from a database, for example, this gives you a way to, say, provide a username and password to pull from the database, or maybe a database location or configuration or something. Pull from that in a relatively checked and defined way, and then collect your data, throw it in a file, and you're good. It's relatively straightforward. There's not too much to it. And I don't know, we've got 17 lines here to write this thing out, which for writing to a file, you just need these two. Probably overkill, but, well, actually, if we're just going to write to a file, we could just, open up bash and just do a echo hello world to our test.txt. Done. That works too. But if we don't want to do that, if we're doing all this other advanced Python-y stuff, this is a good option because it just makes it easy. And if you, especially if you're expecting like command arguments or you're doing something more complicated, the ability to just define something like this and use it is really, really handy. I don't know, at least in C# or Java, I don't know if something similar to this. And Python is a little bit easier to do scripts in anyway, so it's not compiled, for example. So it just makes it a little bit easier to kind of redistribute them, and they just kind of work. So unless you're on Mac, and then everybody kind of gets confused. But that's totally separate. I'm not bitter, I swear. Anyway, I'll leave it here because this is sort of what I wanted to cover. I just thought that this Argparse library was super cool, and it's really, 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 really handy. So yeah, if you guys start using this, let me know. I'd love to see what you guys are using it for. If you think I missed something or could do something better, let me know as well, because I probably did, and you're probably right. So yeah, I'll leave it here. Until next time, see you, Internet.